Thank you for joining us today. Today's session is it's a session that is meant to build off. We did a session on April 3rd on 403 for 403B Day. And this session is meant to build off of that, but you certainly did not have to attend that session to get a lot from this session as well. Whereas the session on 403 was kind of an introduction to what 403B plans were and what 457B plans were. This one's going to take a little bit of a deeper dive into exactly what the investments are that are available within 403B plans. We're also going to look at investing in the digital age. So we're going to look at investing apps. We're also going to look at how to determine what to look for in a financial professional. And I say that in quotes. You'll find out why probably later. And we're going to look at a few other things that deal all with investing typically within 403B plans. And we might look a little bit at investing outside of 403B plans as well. But I'm just going to do a real quick brief introduction and turn it over to our professionals that are here today. But again, happy Financial Literacy Month. For those who I haven't seen during the month, we've had a lot of programming for the month of April. So thank you to those who've been able to come out to some of our programming. We've got one more event left in this Teacher Personal Finance series. That last one, I'm going to do an in-person event. That's going to be on the last day of Financial Literacy Month. It's on April 30th. That's going to be at our Central District office at Fulton Hall Educational Service Center in West Palm Beach. So if you want to come out for that, that'll be a good session. That's at 4:30. Try to give you a little bit more time to let you, for those who have to drive a little bit further to get to the district office. But you will get a stipend for attending. And I think it's a good session. We typically used to only do that in an hour, but we get so many questions on that we push it to an hour and a half this year. So that'll be the last one if you can attend that. And then you can see on the left there, I'm not going to go through all those, but we still have a few different programs left for Financial Literacy Month that are ongoing before this month is over. So hopefully we'll see you there if possible. Quick reminder, we do a lot of personal finance programming in our schools. For those who don't know me, that is primarily what I do. I don't typically do a lot of teacher personal finance. If you were at the last session, I sort of talked about why we kind of have taken on those sessions. I'm not going to repeat all that because I know several of you were in that session. What we primarily do is focus on personal finance for the students. And we do a lot of preparing teachers to teach the standards that they have to teach to the students. So that's really our primary job. We have, people are always surprised to hear exactly how much personal finance there is in our schools now. We have a lot of different courses. We have 5 different courses right now that can be offered that have different personal finance standards in them. And we have a required personal finance course for those who don't know that. That's for that cohort that just started this year as freshmen. They're required to take a personal finance course before they graduate. So that's great news. At the middle school level, we have an elective course. We have 5 or 6 middle schools that are doing that elective course this year, hoping to get some more for next year. And then even at the elementary level, as young as kindergarten, we're doing personal finance programming. We have required 4th grade benchmarks, so we do a lot in 4th grade. But then we also have a lot of economics benchmarks that are required that have personal finance concepts. And we get creative. We integrate it into English language arts. We integrate it into math. We find ways to get creative with that. For those who are on this call, are classroom teachers. If you're a high school classroom teacher and are ever interested in potentially teaching personal finance, this is a sort of a one-stop shop for you. So I just wanted to put that on there. If you're a middle school teacher interested in teaching personal finance, here's your one-stop shop. And if you're an elementary teacher that is interested in integrating some personal finance concepts, this is just the first. I have a 40 slide deck that has a lot of great K through 5 personal finance and economics resources. This is just the first page, the introductory page, but it's got a table of contents. So if you're a 1st grade teacher, 2nd grade teacher, 3rd grade teacher, you can click right on those and go right to the resources for your grade level. So you'll get a copy of this before, if not before the day is over, I'll send in an email to you tomorrow. I also want to remind you again we have on-demand personal finance modules available. These are done through NGPF. They've been gracious enough to allow us to use these on-demand modules for our teachers. We set this up in our professional development learning system in e-learning. You should be familiar with e-learning, those of you who are district teachers on here. So you can go to e-learning and do a search on there for personal finance on demand. And you can do these for in-service credit, even if you're not a personal finance teacher. So if it's just you want to learn more about personal finance and you want some in-service points, you can do some of these on-demand modules. You get 2 in-service points per module. They're each an hour, roughly an hour. If you are a personal finance teacher, you can also get a stipend for it. So anybody can earn the points, up to 40 points, because there's 20 modules we made available for this. And then if you're a teacher of personal finance, you can also earn stipends for doing those, up to $250. So it's a good deal. Here's the modules that are available. I just want to show you these real quick. The ones that are highlighted are the ones, these are all, by the way, created for adults. These were not created for children. These are created for adults. Now, they're meant for adults that are going to be teaching children, but even if you're not going to be somebody who teaches personal finance in a classroom, they would still be very useful in terms of learning more knowledge about some of these topics that you might be interested in. I wanted to, just before turning it over, I want to do a real quick review of our last session, just to get you caught up in case you missed out on the last session. The last session we talked about, hey, there's this 3-legged stool, although we heard it referred to in Jill's presentation. She called it a 4-legged stool, right? She split that paid by you a leg in half. 3-legged, 4-legged, what this is this is what we want you to be able to rely on in retirement. It's what you should be able to stand on to have a comfortable retirement. That's presumably why you're all here right now, is because you're starting to think, about that. I said it last session, it doesn't matter if you're 21, 41, 61, right? This is something that each of you should be preparing for. And we said these 3 legs are, one of them is what's paid by your employer, which is a pension. That's pretty much gone for most people, but not you, right? You have FRS, which is technically you might not have a pension. If you're in the investment plan, it's not technically a pension, but we'll talk about that on April 30th if you come to that. But you still get something. You're just, as a teacher in Florida, you get Social Security. That's paid by the government. Right? There's roughly 15 states where teachers do not get Social Security because they don't pay into it. But you still have that. So you've got 2 legs of the stool. If you work a full career as a teacher, that's going to replace about 70-ish% of your pre-retirement income, which is pretty good. I mean, most people would be very happy with that. But as we've talked about the last session, most of you, when you imagine your retirement, probably imagine living on more than 70% of your pre-retirement income. So that's the 3rd leg that we're here to address, which is, what are you doing? What's the part that's paid by you? And that's that leg titled retirement savings. Specifically, it's tax advantaged retirement savings, right? You could save in a savings account or a brokerage account and buy and sell stocks every day, but those are taxable events. Those are taxable accounts. We're trying to show you that the IRS has created these tax advantaged accounts, right? Specifically, we're here to talk about 403Bs and 457Bs. That's what's been created for public school teachers. But there's also IRAs, Roth IRAs, and things like that are tax advantaged. So that's the part where most people, that leg of the stool is where most people are greatly lacking. And then just to keep you up to date for those who are brand new to this, sort of what a 403B and a 457B plan was, and then I'm going to turn it over to Lisa and Jill to kick it off for us here. But 403B, again, I just said it, it's a tax advantage plan. Specifically, it's employer sponsored. You can only get a 403B or 457B through your employer. It's typically offered to school employees or other nonprofits. It's only funded through salary reduction agreements. So if you have like a lump sum, you have like $10,000, you can't just dump it into a 403B. It's only taken straight out of your paycheck. Right, and that's an agreement you have with the district. You have to sign these salary reduction agreements, which you can do directly in PeopleSoft, FYI. The one thing I want to really key on, it's not an investment type. We're here today to talk about different investment types, but the 403B is an investment account. It's what holds your investments. I hear that confused all the time. I talk to teachers, what do you invest in? I'm invested in a 403B. That's not your investment, right? That's what's holding your investment. Right. While don't get me wrong, the most important step is actually opening up an account and funding it. Pretty close behind that is the actual investment that's in that account. Right. You need to pay attention to the actual investment that's sitting in that 403B account, because that's going to determine how much money you have when you're ready to take it out in retirement. And that's sort of what we're going to focus on today. All right. There's a traditional 403B, which is a pre-tax contribution. And what pre-tax means is it lowers your taxable income. So if you made, say, $70,000 last year and you contributed $5,000 to a 403b, you would only owe taxes on $65,000. That's pre-tax. The investment then grows tax-free, and you pay the taxes at withdrawal, right? Whereas with a Roth 403b, which is also available to you in the district, that's an after-tax contribution. So if you made $70,000 and contributed $5,000 to your Roth 403b, you pay taxes on $70,000, right? It's after-tax money. You pay the tax going in, right? You pay it up front. Again, the investments grow tax-free, but then you do not pay taxes at withdrawal. So that should catch you up. That was a real quick sprint to catch you up on what we sort of talked about in the last session. So today we've got two different presentations. We're going to lead it off with Jill Persson and Lisa Roberts from the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commissions. They're from the S.E.C. They're going to talk to you about investing in the digital age. And then after that, we're going to turn it over. We've got Dan Otter again here today, and he's also here with his partner at 403BY, Scott Dauenhauer, who's a CFP. So we have the best of the best professionals for you today. So hopefully, if you got any questions, you're ready to ask them today. So with that being said, I am going to turn it over to Jill and Lisa, and I'm going to pull up their presentation as I do that.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lisa Roberts. I'm an attorney with the S.E.C. out of the Miami Regional Office. I'll introduce Jill.
Hi, I'm Jill Persson. I'm from San Francisco Regional Office, and I'm a senior examiner.
And we are so happy that you're here today to get more information, because that stool isn't going to stand unless you do what you need to do. And it's great that you're getting information, because it's confusing, and we're here to provide you with information. We want to make this conversational. So if you have any questions for any of the presenters today, feel free to ask them. We have to give a disclaimer, Jill and I, since we work for the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, we have to let you know that we're providing this information as a service to investors, and it's not a statement of official S.E.C. policy, a legal interpretation, or investment advice. We may give you some advice, but it's just our own personal advice. Next slide. So some of the things we're going to cover today are technology and investing. Technology has changed a lot, as has investing. In this digital age, there are more options available for you. And with all the options, you've got to be extra careful. We're going to talk about investment products, how to choose a fund. We're going to talk about investment professionals, and we're going to talk about a very important topic, which is tips to avoid fraud. Nobody thinks they're ever going to be the victim of fraud, but when you hear some of the things that we talk about and some red flags, you see how easy somebody could become a victim and make an investment, without asking all the questions you should ask. Next slide. Technology and investing. Next slide. So new to investing, you've got to be careful with things like celebrity endorsements. Sometimes people think that if a celebrity is endorsing a product, they are investing in that product. For example, we recently brought a case against Kim Kardashian. She was promoting a crypto stock. She was paid maybe $150,000. And what was wrong with what she did is that she didn't let people know that she was being paid to promote this stock. And a lot of people can believe that a person who's endorsing a particular investment is in fact an investor. So she got fined, I believe, more than $1 million. And you need to realize that unless a celebrity says, I'm an investor or I'm being paid for this investment endorsement, you just have to understand that. Also, social media. You can't believe everything that you see on social media, from investments to what's the best makeup, etc. A lot of people in this digital age rely on social media for a lot of things. There's chat rooms, and people can say anything. And this type of media, it can be riddled with bad investing advice. So, I give these presentations all the time, and then I read articles and I send them to myself, because the articles are saying what I'm saying to people. And Jill and I work for a federal agency. We don't get paid to endorse one thing or to say one thing or another. But in social media, chat rooms, internet videos, you could fall prey to bad investing advice. So do your own homework, read a lot of articles. And once you start seeing a consistency in the messaging and you start really understanding, that's when you should make your investments. Family and friends may tell you they're doing great with a particular stock, crypto, etc. But pause. You must do your own research. Coworkers, fellow students, again, do your own research and play the long game. This is what people fall into. A lot of times they think, I haven't made a lot of money and I'm desperate. I'm 45. I don't have that much money saved. I feel like it's so late. So let me try to make this investment where I have the opportunity, or you think you have the opportunity to get rich quickly. And that's not the way it works. Investing isn't a get rich quick scheme. It takes time and consistency. Whether the markets are up or down, you need to keep contributing. So maybe some people on this call are new. In your teaching jobs, new at this investment opportunity. It's never too late. Obviously, the earlier you start, you have more chance of making more money, but it's never too late. So play the long game. Investing isn't a get rich quick scheme. Next slide. So investing apps are new to me. When I was growing up, there were no computers. Now there's computers, there's cell phones, there are investing apps. And these apps make it really easy for somebody to make an investment. Now, young people have grown up always knowing apps, having phones, playing video games. But these investing apps, you must be careful and not be tempted. The first thing you need to do is go on our website, investor.gov. Right on the landing page, you can check the person that's making you an investment offer, or your broker or your investment advisor. You've got to go on investor.gov and make sure that the app is a registered investment firm. I've been at places where people talk about firms and then we go and check them and they're not registered. And with the registration comes protections that you need. Mobile platforms that use technology at your fingertips, they do help you save and invest. They're, apps are fine, but some apps allow you to buy and sell securities or get advice on investing. And sometimes they make certain complex products available to you that you really have no business investing in unless you really understand a product. Don't do it. Also, with investing apps, sometimes you might get reminders. Hey, Brian, you haven't invested in 60 days and fireworks are going off and it's time and there's great opportunities, and you might be tempted by these messages that you're getting. So it can lead to gamification. So make sure first and foremost that your investment app is a registered investment firm, and then you be careful. You ask the questions. Sometimes with investing apps, you don't have the opportunity to ask questions. If you don't understand something fully, do not invest. And be careful when you use investing apps. Next slide. So this is some of the things that I said. Fees may seem low, but find out how costs and commissions work. Human interaction, like I said, or getting help may be limited to the online queries. And maybe you have more than just a question. Like, for example, I called CVS today and they refuse to let you talk to a pharmacist, and you just have a question and they keep giving you options. And this is what happens sometimes with investing apps. The interaction and the questions that you have may only be limited to the questions that you can ask online. And it may not be the question you want to ask. So apps, like I said, give investors access to complex or high-risk products or strategies. You have to understand what you're investing in before you invest. And as I mentioned, it could encourage some to overtrade through gamification of trading and instant notifications on stock moves. And remember that I said, getting rich is a slow process. You just have to be consistent. Going in and out of the market, studies have shown that people who go in and out of the market lose money. You have to just be consistent and patient, and it takes time. Next slide. And I'll pass it to Jill, who's going to talk about investment products.
Hi, everybody. Today, I just one note before we move into the investment products. When you're investing in a 403B, you're limited to mutual funds and annuities. And so they're usually you won't have an app that you need to worry about, but you will have many, many products to choose from. And it usually is, when you sign up, it usually is in an electronic format if you're doing it yourself. But I'll move into the next slide, which is mutual funds. So mutual funds, they're a pool of money that it's invested into stocks and bonds and other things. And it's a combination of investments, usually in a sector or a company or a series of companies. And by combining these investors and the actual investment products, you're hedging your risk a little bit. So it's a little less risky than investing in the stock market or in the bond market on your own. So that is a benefit of mutual funds. The way you purchase them is you purchase a share, and it represents your proportionate ownership of the fund and the income that the fund or the portfolio generates. You, as a shareholder, buy and redeem shares directly from the mutual fund at something called net asset value. And I want to just pause right here and say that on our website, investor.gov, and I will talk about this in a little bit, we have a teacher's page, but we also have a general landing page. And on that general landing page, if you want to learn about any type of product that we regulate, and that would be for 403Bs, it would be mutual funds and variable annuities, you can go into the search bar and type in the type of product that you're going to invest in, and you get reams of stuff to read. So if you are new to investing and new to mutual funds and new to variable annuities, that is a great resource for you to go and just do your own research. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so these are the types of mutual funds and the benefits. I think I mentioned about diversification a minute ago, but the main kinds of funds are bond funds, which are bonds and debt securities, stock funds, which is stock market. Sometimes there's ETF funds. Money market funds are cash equivalent, and those are usually government bonds and other securities. Balance funds are stocks and bonds and money markets, depending on like certain risk factors you want to take on: aggressive, conservative, moderate. Target date funds is sort of the sweet spot for retirement because it's basically designed with a retirement date in mind. And the fund allocations tracked with the age of the investor. And over time, the investment mix gradually shifts from something with more risk to something with less risk, getting to that preserved principal and income level as you near retirement date. I believe Dan and Scott are going to go over this a little bit more. Some of the benefits, most funds and ETFs are managed by investment advisors who are registered with the S.E.C. And you don't have to worry about managing your investment. They're going to do it for you. And diversification, I mentioned, this is where you spread out investments over a sector or range of company, industry, whatever. And that does lower the risk if one individual company or sector has a dip. And it's less expensive to participate in a mutual fund than necessarily owning individual stocks or bonds. And they mention on here benefit of liquidity. They are liquid and you can sell them, but you do have to wait a few days before you get your payout. And next slide, please. How to choose a fund. Okay, so next slide. So you want to ask yourself some questions, and we mentioned this in the last presentation, some of these questions, but generally, anytime that you're investing in anything, a variable annuity, mutual fund, you want to ask questions about the investment and the investment professional. We'll provide resources towards the end of this deck. But the first thing you want to ask yourself is when you're investing is, how does this particular investment match my goals? And then if you're being sold something by an advisor or broker, which we'll talk about in a minute, you want to ask them how it will match your goals. And how does it compare? How does this investment compare with my risk tolerance? Is it too risky? Is it not risky enough? Will the fund help me diversify my investments? And by their very nature, funds are diversified, but you can find some that are more diversified than others. And the big one here is, what are the fees and expenses? We'll talk about that in just a minute. Those are big with mutual funds because you are going to have them, and it does reduce your investment. Um, and what are the fund's performance over time? This is something you're going to be able to look in the prospectus. And what are the top 10 securities holding? Again, in the prospectus, which is our next slide. So the prospectus is a really key resource if you're investing in a mutual fund. There's two types of a prospectus. One is what they call the statutory prospectus. And when people think about a prospectus, usually they just call it a prospectus, not the statutory prospectus. And they're about that thick. What you really want to look at if you're an investor is the summary prospectus. And that's just a few pages long and contains key information, same highlight of information that the statutory prospectus contains. And that's things like investment objectives and goals, what the fund's investment objectives and goals, the fee table. So that's going to show you what the fees and expenses are, the investments, what they're invested in, the risks, the performance, the management and the portfolio managers, the purchase and sale of fund shares, tax information, and financial compensation. Now, these are set by S.E.C. regulations, so those will always be in the summary prospectus and in the prospectus. So you want to make sure that when you're looking at those things that you look for especially the fee table, which we'll talk more about fees in just a second. And just so you know, mutual funds are required to provide you a copy of the prospectus after you purchase any shares, but you can also ask to see it before you buy, and you can look it up on Google or Morningstar or several places, and also on FINRA. FINRA is the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority. They have something called the Mutual Fund Expense Analyzer. So if you want to compare mutual funds, you can put them in, and it will tell you which one's a better value for you and your investment objectives. Okay, next slide. Investment fees. We talked about this on the last presentation, so I'll just again highlight the big thing is people when they buy any kind of investment, they don't realize that their investment purchase is going to be probably reduced by a commission, sales load, fees if you're in a mutual fund. So you want to make sure you know that what the fees are when you buy, you want to know what they are when you own, and you want to know what they are when you sell. And so when you buy, you're going to be paying probably a sales load or a purchase fee. And by example, if you invest $1,000, there's a 5% load, there'll be a $50 fee. So that makes your investable amount is $950. So it does reduce the amount you invest. And also, once you've purchased it, there's going to be management fees, operating expenses. These things are going to be annualized or paid quarterly, and they'll show up on your account statement, which you want to look at when you get it on the email or when you get it in your mailbox. You want to open that up and take a peek. Make sure you're getting charged what you should be getting charged. And then again, when you sell, so some funds have a back end load, so that means that you're going to get it's called a contingent deferred sales charge. I know that's like word salad, but basically what it means is you're going to get a percentage charge if you have not held it that long. And so if you hold it for a specified period, that will go down to zero. And some funds charge redemption fees. So that means if you're going to cash out, you're going to get charged for it. Next slide, please. So just to highlight, fees and expenses can be different from each product, from product to product, and from specific fund to specific fund, specific annuity to annuity. These small differences in the fees can make a huge difference over time. And so you really want to understand what that, 0.5% is going to look like in 20 or 30 years. And generally, investment products with higher fees must perform better than investment products with lower fees to generate the same returns. That is key. And then the next slide, you can research any investment product on Edgar, which is the S.E.C. And that's, I believe it's edgar.gov, but you can Google it. We don't actually have the website up here, but if you want to research any investment product, you go to Edgar. You can also go to Google. If you have what they call a QSIP or the letter symbol, you can type that in, and sometimes even Yahoo Finance will get you what you need to know. Okay, moving on to investment professionals. Next slide, please. Okay, we'll go to what is a broker? Okay, so brokers are the ones that execute trades for customers and clients. They may make a recommendation. If they do make a recommendation, it has to be in your best interest. Brokers are paid commissions to actually buy and sell the securities. And I just want to make a quick note here before we move on to the investment advisor. I believe that there are several choices in your stable of investments with TCG administrators. I think I have that wrong, but it's your third-party administrator. You can buy these for your 403b account on your own. I don't think that all of them require you to have a salesperson. Some probably do. But if you wanted to buy these on your own, you would not be needing to pay the fee to the broker or the advisor. But if you're out in the world and you're buying something for your own investment account, you will encounter a broker, and if you're buying any kind of mutual fund, and you will have to pay them a commission. An investment advisor, next slide, please. So an investment advisor is what Dan and Scott will talk about is a fiduciary. And they have a little bit of a higher standard than the broker. They advise you when to buy, sell securities. They monitor the investments. They're a little more hands-on, but they're also required to do better for you than for themselves. So they can't put their own needs and wants ahead of yours. Next slide, please. They use the term in here, best interest of the client, but it's actually a little bit more than that. They really are required to really understand your investment situation and really do for you what you need to have happen. They must seek the best execution of client transactions, and they are typically paid on assets under management, which means that if you've invested a certain amount of things, you have let's say you have $10,000 or $100,000, they will pay you will pay a percentage of that investment of those funds to them annually or quarterly. Yeah, I see Aaron's comment in the chat. 403B World does use the term advisor loosely. So when we say advisor, we mean registered investment advisor, and that is somebody that is a company that has to be registered with the S.E.C. And you can actually, I think we cover this in just a minute, but you can actually look up your broker on FINRA Broker Check. And when we talked about a broker a minute ago, and you can look up their disciplinary history, you can look up how long they've been in business, where they've worked, and that is brokercheck.com. And then you can also look up investment advisors from the S.E.C. at IAPD. I don't know if it's gov or .com. I'm sorry, I don't think we have it on here. But if you want to look up an investment advisor and see what kind of history they have, they also have disclosures on there that talk about what kind of business they do, what type of clients they have, and that sort of thing. I think we need to go to slide 21. So ask about credentials and experience. Okay. So of course, everybody, like I was saying, everybody has a different level of experience, but you really want to get somebody that has some professional experience and educational background. There's also a lot of titles. I think they mentioned that Scott's a CFP. That's one of the better ones. There's a lot of word salad out there, and people. Yes, Veronica.
Oops, give me a second to come on. Is there a difference between being called a fiduciary and an investment advisor? Are there different types?
Yeah, Scott, do you want to take this?
If Scott's not
Oh,
available.
Dan.
Yeah.
I'm
let's
here.
go.
I'm
Okay,
I'm
go
here.
for
But
it.
you go ahead. You go ahead. Start, Dan, if you want. But yeah, go ahead.
Sure. It is so easy to call yourself an advisor, and the people you meet in your staff lounges and through your email inboxes are probably sales agents. A fiduciary is someone who must pledge to put your interest above theirs. This is why Jill, her colleague Lisa, Scott, myself, and Aaron all believe there is nothing wrong with using an advisor, but you should use a fiduciary one.
And I would add that often, if you ask if they're fiduciary, often the answer you'll get back is, "Oh, I'm required to act in your best interest," and that's not the question that you asked. So the question is, are you a fiduciary? It's actually, the question should be, are you a fiduciary at all times when you're dealing with me? And there is a yes or no answer to that. If there's any hemming or hawing, then you can expect that they're probably not a fiduciary at all times. And an investment advisor rep can also not be an investment advisor rep at all in all their dealings with you. So they can shift. Now they're supposed to acknowledge that they're shifting to being a salesperson, but they don't always do it, or they might do it in a way that is not obvious to you. So I think the question is always, are you a fiduciary at all times? And the answer should be a yes or no to that.
Right. And to add to that, again, you don't have to use a broker or a fiduciary when you're investing in a 403B or 457B. You can do it on your own. You don't have to pay the fees. But I want to kind of touch on something that Scott mentioned, and that is best interest. So brokers are required, and brokers are usually the ones that will sell you a mutual fund or an annuity. If they're wearing the hat, like Dan just showed you the hats, if they're wearing both hats, then they are required to act as a fiduciary in your very best interest. The brokers don't have as high a standard, so it's really important to know those differences. Now, to touch on something that Aaron mentioned, which is the term advisor is used loosely. Just ask the question. Just make sure that you understand, as Scott mentioned. Ask until you are clear on their answer, because they will try to wheedle out of it and tell you something that they want you to hear, that you think that they're saying the right thing, and they often are not. And like I believe Dan mentioned something, that they come into the mail rooms, they come into the lunch rooms, they bring a piece of pizza, they bring a sandwich, they bring tickets to a baseball game. And this is where I'm going to give my little refrigerator speech, is if you were buying a refrigerator, you're going to spend a lot of time researching it. You spend more time researching your refrigerator, which is usually less than two or three grand, than investing thousands and thousands of dollars, your life savings, with a salesperson that is going to give you a sandwich. So, all right. So we talked about designations. Our friend Scott is a CFP, but if you want to learn, next slide, please. Sorry. If you want to learn about what kind of designations they are, and if it's a real designation, you can go to FINRA's Professional Designations Tool, and you can Google that and just say FINRA Professional Designation Tool, and it will tell you what the word salad at the end of their name really means. Okay, we'll go to the next slide.
And I just want to add something, that people use these designations to impress you sometimes. And sometimes people think, oh, the more designations, the better you are at the advice that you're going to give. You really should ask, what did you have to do to earn that designation? Was it something you just paid $50 for, or was it just something that you had to take courses in, that you had to do continuing legal education, not legal education, but continuing education, so that your knowledge is commensurate with the times. So a case that I worked on, a person had a designation of HSG after their name. I had no idea what that was. So I asked in the deposition, what does that stand for? And as it turns out, it's high school graduate. So you must ask, because if I wouldn't have asked, I would have never known that the person is trying to pull a fast one. And you know, the FINRA list is a list. You can, if somebody says they're a CPA, check them out. Nobody should be hesitant to describe their education, their professional background. Let's say you pull up a name on our investor.gov website and it's somebody that does have a little bit of some customer complaints. The customer complaints doesn't mean that they're always, you know, at fault, that they did something wrong, because anybody could make a complaint. For example, somebody who lost their money and is just really upset that they made a bad choice, but they want to blame it on the broker to try to see how they could recover their money. Ask questions about everything. You're not offending anybody. It's your money. And like Jill said, you spend more time selecting a refrigerator than you do sometimes with your hard-earned money, the investments that you're going to make. Back to you, Jill.
That is a great story, Lisa. I've never heard that. That's awesome. Okay, here are some of the questions that you can ask an investment professional. Are you registered? Are you or your firm, are you registered with FINRA or the S.E.C? Now, if you're a broker, you're going to be registered with FINRA. If you're an advisor, you could be registered with the state or the S.E.C. What products and services do you offer? How are you getting paid? Are you getting paid on the assets under management or commission, like I talked about earlier? And the big one is, back to everything that Lisa and Scott and Dan said, what experience do you have working with people like me? And once again, you can go to Broker Check for brokers and look at their professional history and see how long they've been in the business. And you can go to the investment advisor lookup, IAPD, and see how long that firm has been in business. Because oftentimes you'll find people that will represent themselves as experts and as having been in business for a very long time, and they've only been in business for 18 months. So it's good to check that. Next slide, please. And find out if the products and services are right for you. As Lisa mentioned early on with the apps, just do your own research, ask the questions. You can ask and then you can validate by looking someone up. When someone recommends something to you, don't feel pressured into investing right away. Give yourself time to research. Give yourself time to ask questions. Make sure that when you ask questions that you absolutely understand it before you invest in it. And don't worry about feeling like you shouldn't be asking the questions and you should understand it. This stuff is complicated, and especially if it is not a good investment, it's more complicated. So you really want to make sure you understand before you invest. Let's see. Next slide, please. So this is where I mentioned you can look up IAPD. It says you can go to checkoninvestor.gov, and I think there's a button that you can push, and it'll give you their license and registration, employment history, and other important disclosures. And I believe there's an education component to that too, which Lisa mentioned. So you can look up and also look at their professional designations are usually listed, and then you can look at the FINRA webpage and see what those mean. And it is a key tool that you should be using. So Edgar and investor.gov, Edgar for your products and investor.gov for your people. And now we're going to move on to Lisa. So slide 26, please.
So tips to avoid fraud. Jill talked about annuities, mutual funds. The tips to avoid fraud apply to everything. The legs of the stool don't have to be limited to the 403B and 457 because you want to diversify, right? You want to have things that make your money grow. For example, you might want to invest in a home and hopefully it will appreciate. That's one thing. You should invest through your school, through the options that you're given at the school. But you can also go outside of those couple of things and you can invest in the stock market. You can put money in your Roth IRA, in your traditional IRA. So fraud is something that's around us, especially when making investments. There's a lot of people that are doing it just to steal your money. So next slide. But no one thinks that they could be the victim of fraud, right? We all think we're too smart for this, but you've got to be careful and keep things in mind. Financial fraud prevalence, this is a study that more than 50 billion per year is lost to fraud. More than 8 in 10 are solicited for potentially fraudulent offers. So keep that in mind as I tell you some red flags of fraud. Next slide. So these are 5 red flags. Unregistered and unlicensed sellers. People prefer not to have to register because then there's no consequences in their mind. You really need to deal with registered people so that you have protections. People can offer you investment opportunities with promises of high returns and little or no risk. Use common sense. If somebody is promising you a 23% return, like what's really happening in the market at this time? 23 sounds like a lot. Little or no risk. Everything has risk. So please keep that in mind. I know people want to believe because they want to get rich quick, but you cannot. You've got to step back and go slow because getting rich is a slow and steady process. If somebody pressures you to buy quickly, that should be a red flag. If somebody's got you on the phone and they say, you know what, I've got 10 other people waiting in line to make this investment. Are you in or are you out? You got super lucky that I called you. I called you by mistake. You picked up the phone you weren't the person I meant to call, but you're super lucky. Pressure to buy quickly. If you are not comfortable, pass it up. Also, free meals. A lot of firms offer a free meal. We're going to Red Lobster, and then you feel being polite. I ate the lobster tail. I should listen to what they've got to say. And nothing is really free. They're not doing it just to be nice. So these free meals are something that you just have to be careful with the information that you're receiving. And then also red flags in the financial professional's background. Like Jill and I have mentioned, you go to our website, you look somebody up. If you looked up Jordan Belfort, who was the person behind Wolf of Wall Street, the mastermind played by Leonardo DiCaprio, I did this today with some students, and it says he's barred from the industry. He cannot sell securities. So there are red flags in the financial professional's background. If the financial professional has filed for bankruptcy, you ask yourself, like, we can't tell you who to deal with, but let's say the person has filed for bankruptcy. Is that somebody that you want to deal with? You ask yourself that question. But these are red flags that help you make these very important decisions because it's your money. Next slide. So persuasion tactics of fraudsters, phantom riches, dangling the prospect of wealth. You see somebody that's dressed in, very nicely. They're driving a fancy car. That can all be like a leased vehicle, clothes that they bought and they plan to return tomorrow. But they want to give you the impression that they're very well off. And when you ask them, how did you do it? Well, it's because I invested in this and this and this, and I invested through this person. Ask the questions and do the research. Source credibility, claiming to be with a reputable firm or to have a special credential or expertise. If somebody says they're a certified financial planner, you can go and check that out. If somebody says they're a CPA, you can go and check that out. I worked on a case where somebody was in the military. Well, he really wasn't, but he was targeting people in the military, and he had a business card that said he went to West Point. He never went to West Point. He wasn't in the military. And it's very horrible to think that your war buddy could do this to you, but they can. Do not just trust people because they are like you. Reciprocity, offering to do a small favor for you in return for a big favor. That is like the free meal. And social consensus, leading you to believe that other savvy investors have already invested. I worked on a case where we found scripts that the firm was using. And of course, who had invested in this stock that they're trying to sell you? Warren Buffett. And who wouldn't want to invest in some things that Warren Buffett has invested in? So they lead you to believe that other savvy investors have already invested so that you can think, well, if Warren Buffett has invested in this, it must be good. Next slide. So 3 ways to avoid fraud. What have we been saying? Ask a lot of questions. Unless you're comfortable, do not make the investment. research every investment opportunity thoroughly, and conduct a background check of any investment professional at investor.gov. Next slide. So some common scams. Next slide. Government impersonators. Scammers may pose as SEC or other government employees, like the IRS. They could call you around this time and say, hey, you owe blah, blah, blah. Government workers usually don't call you. In our situation, we do call people as witnesses or investors, and we are not offended when they say, what's your name? What's your main phone number? And we'll call you back. And that's fair. And you should do stuff like that. SEC does not endorse investment offers, assist in purchase, sale of securities, or participate in money transfers. Sometimes people say, well, we have made a filing with the SEC. We have a division, it's called Corporation Finance, that reviews these filings. We are not putting a stamp of approval on any company's, public company's filings. We do not endorse investment offers. The SEC does not make unsolicited communications seeking detailed personal or financial information, nor does the IRS. You should never give personal or financial information to anyone. Sometimes you want to be friendly to somebody who's calling you and you say, oh, I live here, or I've got this many kids, or the grandkids, or whatever. Fraudsters are using this information so that they can have information to make you feel comfortable and get them and invest your money with them. So do not provide detailed information or financial information to anyone. Next slide. Ponzi schemes. Scammers pay existing investors with funds from new investors. Like I said, somebody gets you to invest because they said, Warren Buffett invested, and then all of a sudden and with these fraudsters, they are going to make sure that you make money on a couple of investments, so that then you go and you tell your friend, hey, I've got all this stuff. I'm going on a vacation. I'm going to Hawaii. Where did you get the money? Well, I'm investing with the ABC company. You should invest too. Ponzi schemes, they often promise high returns with little or no risk, overly consistent returns. Nobody has a crystal ball. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. Ponzi schemes sometimes involve secretive or complex strategies. If you do not understand, don't let the person selling you the investment opportunity make you feel stupid. That's part of their scam. They make you feel stupid. One case that I worked on, they had comebacks, like written out comebacks. So a man is approached by somebody on the phone and he says, I got to talk to my wife about it. And the comeback is, well, who wears the pants in your family? And some men might be like, well, you're right. It's only a $4,000 investment and she's going to be thrilled when I double this money. And they are trying to get you to invest, and they will offer you complex schemes and tell you, you don't need to, just trust me. But you need to fully understand. And if you don't, please just pass up on that opportunity. Unregistered sellers and investments. A lot of our cases involve unregistered sellers and unregistered investments. So keep that in mind. If somebody tells you they're registered with the SEC, you have the ability to check and ask questions, and don't rush into anything. Next slide. Affinity fraud, like I mentioned, targeting military. Affinity fraud targets members of identifiable groups and communities, and fraudsters often are members of the group or they pretend to be. And the Miami office right now, we have an initiative, and it's Fraud Against Minorities initiative, because we've seen an uptick of cases where Haitian people are targeting Haitian people. So I have been going to Haitian churches. It's very hard for me to be allowed into that community. So I have friends that are Haitian that invite me. I speak to a pastor and they invite me, and I go. And what I do is I bring samples of cases that we filed, and it's Haitians targeting Haitians, raising $30 million. I had these documents translated into Creole, because remember, I'm the government, and sometimes people that are minorities may not trust government workers. But these cases are real, and it's real people losing a lot of money, their life savings, and the fraudsters do not care that you are losing your life savings. They're just lining their pockets. So be careful, because fraudsters can be members of a group or pretend to be. Next slide. So these are some groups that are targeted: seniors or retirees. I gave a presentation last week at the Villages, which is a senior community, ethnic communities, like we talked about, military personnel, professional athletes. I've given presentations to professional athletes because they have money. So who are these fraudsters going to target? People with money. Federal employees could target federal employees, religious groups, somebody from your church, somebody from your temple, a pastor, and you want to believe these people because they're like you. But you know what? They might be selling you something that is totally legit, but you need to convince yourself by asking the right questions and doing your own research. Next slide. So S.E.C resources, I'll pass it back to Jill.
Okay, so next slide. Once again, this is our investor.gov website. As you can see from all the different things. Oh, here we go. If you go to the lower right hand, right above Get Help, it says About Investment Professionals. And so that is where you would want to go if you're going to research a particular firm or individual. And there's also, I think we have it on the landing page here, check out your investment professional. There's also, next slide, there's also financial planning tools that you can find on our website, investor.gov, just all sorts of different things, especially if you were trying to figure out how compound interest will affect your investment. That's a great one, especially if you're starting out early in your investing career. Next slide. We also have a landing page for teachers on investor.gov. And on this page, we have a digital guide that's also in paper format that Aaron has copies of that he can give you if you would like to see them. There's also other things on investor.gov/teachers. There's materials for teachers in the classroom to use with their students on investing. Next slide. We also have another landing page, which is sec.gov/teachers. And on that page, we also have the digital guide, which we'll show that landing page in just a second. But we also have podcasts, very short, under 2 minutes, talking about 403Bs and the products that you invest in those 403Bs. Next slide. So this is the landing page. It's called Spotlight on Teachers' Investment Options. And as you can see, underneath the little pig on the books, it says a digital guide for teachers. And if you click on that, when you get to the landing page, it'll give you a little pamphlet. It's about, 50 pages long. And it talks about everything from saving, how to save, how to have good credit. It talks about 403Bs. It talks about general investing and things to look out for, fraud, that sort of thing. It's a great little tool if you're just starting out and you want to learn more about just generalized investing and money health. And then I'm going to turn it over to Lisa to plug the Miami office.
Yes, I am from the Miami office. I'm local. We give presentations not only to teachers, but to students on financial literacy. In fact, today I gave 2 presentations at some local Miami-Dade schools. We will be joining you in June for a boot camp that Aaron is hosting. But if you have any questions, you can send an email to miami@sec.gov, and we will definitely get back to you. We've got a lot of resources, and sometimes it's overwhelming, but don't be overwhelmed. You're doing the right thing by participating in these meetings and looking at all the resources that Aaron has, not only for you as an individual, but you as a teacher. It's great. It's important to be financially literate. It's never too late to start. That is the end of our presentation, and now we'll pass it to the next speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Jill. It's much appreciated. So hopefully and I'm going to follow up, and a lot of the tools that were shared, if you weren't able to write all those down or get them, save a bookmark, I'll get those to you within the next few days, the next week or so. I will send all of those out to you so that you have access to those. But yeah, for those of you who are classroom teachers, reach out to Lisa if you are interested in getting an in-classroom presentation. Hopefully we'll see at the boot camp. We'll have them live in person at our boot camp in June. So that'll be nice. And I'll just reiterate what Lisa said at the end is, it can feel overwhelming, but take your time. The people who come into your schools are not going to point you to these resources, right? So understand what's going on and understand that you have a lot of freely available, unbiased, no sales pressure resources that are available to you, through investor.gov, which is directly through the S.E.C, and then also through the next presenter that we're going to turn it over to here, which is through 403BYs, which is a nonprofit. So you heard from them last session. We're going to turn it over to Dan Otter. Dan Otter's the founder of 403BYs, runs it along with Scott Dauenhauer, who's also a CFP. So they're going to dive a little bit deeper into investing within 403B. They're going to talk a little bit deeper about those financial professionals as well. So they have a lot of truth you're going to hear coming from them. So again, a big thank you to Lisa and Jill, and I'll turn it over to Dan now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Lisa and Jill. Appreciate your presentations. Learn some things, as I always do. Hey, folks, thanks for joining us. Scott and I will do our best to share some additional knowledge on saving and investing. Today, we're going to focus a little bit more on those topics, saving and investing, compared to our last presentation, which was more focused on the 403B and 457B. So I want to start with a question. What is a financial concept that you find confusing? You can go ahead and put that in the chat. And you might not have one queued up right now. You might think of it as we go. But that's a question I'd like to ask you as we get started here. Okay, we're going to do a quick fee impact review. We're going to go over some investing basics, and then we're also going to revisit that advisor versus advisor question, because it's particularly relevant to teachers, because you are getting inundated by so-called advisors. Quick disclaimer, nothing presented or discussed is to be construed as investment or tax advice. This can be secured from a vetted, certified financial planner, a CFP, someone like Scott, but unfortunately, he's not available. Okay, quick review. So last time we were together, we contrasted two Palm Beach County teachers who invested exactly the same amount, the same way, for the same length of time, got the same return. However, one saved $300,000 more. Why? So if you were at that presentation, you should know. And if you weren't, if you want to take a guess, I'll give you a couple moments here. And I'll let Scott and Aaron look at the questions, or excuse me, the comments. Okay, so one of these teachers invested in a high-cost product through a high-cost company, Equitable AXA, their target date fund, which charges over 2%. Now, the teacher who had the bigger balance invested in a lower cost investment, one that only charges 0.12%. Please try to avoid the $306,000 mistake. And these are some of the resources we have available to help teachers do just that. We rate the vendors. Red means stop, just like red traffic light means stop. And unfortunately, your district, like too many across the country, is littered with high fee red rated vendors. But the good news is you have one of our highest rated companies available for your 403B and 457B, and that is Fidelity Investments. Okay, folks, saving versus investing. These terms are often used interchangeably, but they're actually quite different. So go ahead and in the chat, make a guess. What is the difference between these two? Savings versus investing. Give you a moment to do that before we proceed, which I'll do now. Okay, it's all about time horizon. Savings is for money that you need between this moment and 5 years. And I'm going to give you an example from this spring. We had a very rainy season in Southern California, and our roof leaked. and I had to come up with $1,000. And I didn't want to sell investments, sell mutual funds to get that $1,000. Luckily, I had a chunk of savings in a very accessible account that I could get that money from to repair my roof. I always say, and maybe you've always heard this, if you have a car, it's not a question of when you're going to need a repair. If you're going to need a repair, it is when you are going to need that repair. So you need a chunk of money set aside for these type of expenses. That is savings. Investing, this is what you do to grow your net worth, to build your retirement nest egg. Very different time horizon. We're talking 10 to 60 years. I really like how this gentleman phrases these two different terms. The primary goal of savings is to protect the principal. That is your balance, your chunk of money. The primary goal of investing is to grow that principal. So how much should you save? We're always asked this question and someone wants a magic number, and there just really isn't, but there are some things you need to think about. The hidden enemy. For years, I used to talk about this, and inflation was always around 2% or so, and it wasn't a big deal. But as we all know, the past several years, especially last year, inflation kind of reared its ugly head again. Now it's coming down at a pretty quick pace, but we're still dealing with its effects. And this is something that can impact both your savings and your investing. So I got a question for you. Today, if you were to buy a first class stamp, it would cost you 68 cents. In the chat, can someone guess what did a first class stamp cost in 1990? 2 years before I started teaching. Any guesses? Give a couple moments there. Any guesses? And the answer is 25 cents.
Wow.
So, thanks to Scott's math, I'm able to show this slide. In those 34 years, that was a 172% increase. Compounded rate about 3%, pretty moderate. The inflation rate, 2.62% from 1990 to 2023. So overall, pretty moderate, but especially in 2022, we had a bit of a spike. Okay, how much should you save? I love this budgeting rule because it simplifies budgeting, which can be a complex process. Basically, you split a pie chart into half. So 50% of your budget should be needs, the basics, groceries, housing, utilities, health insurance, car payment, okay? The remaining 30% can be broken into wants, shopping, dining out, hobbies, going to concerts, etc. And then you should strive to save 20% of your money. Over to you, Scott.
All right. Thanks, Dan. All right. So can anyone tell me, you can please put this in the chat, what is the S&P 500? I'll give you one hint. It's not a car race. That's the Daytona 500. Here we go. All right. Stocks, a stock exchange, steak sauce. That was Dan. All right. So close. The S&P 500 is a stock index. So it is we're going to talk about what indexes are, but it's basically a way to track very large publicly held companies. So companies that have sold themselves to the public that you can purchase on a stock exchange. The S&P 500 represents about 500 of the largest companies in the United States. Now, it's not exactly the 500 largest public companies in the United States, but it's pretty close. So why don't we take a look at a visualization of the S&P 500. Dan's going to share the screen here. And So what do you notice besides, I'm not even going to say it. What do you notice? You can put this in the chat. For example, what might the different colors mean on this chart? So, oh, there's one. Too much. Aaron says too much red. You know what? I like it when stocks are red because, as Aaron knows, we're putting our money in every single month, and the more red the stock market is, the more shares we get to buy. And so when the market does go up, the more money we make. But I get it. Nobody likes to see their account go down in value. So red is negative. I love the size matters from Veronica. So what you'll see here is the bigger the square, I guess it's not a square. I guess it would be a rectangle. The bigger the rectangle, the bigger the size of the company. So we've got Microsoft is really big here. Apple's really big. Google's really big. That means that they are a larger portion of the index than, say, one of those tiny little boxes in like the corners that you can't even see the letters there. The colors, there's a lot of red on this chart, except for this strange thing called INTC or VZ or MS. Anybody know what I'm referring to with these strange letter combinations? What code am I talking about? All right. Stock tab. So basically these are what we call the ticker symbols for the stocks. This is teenager texting. All right, Dan, what does MSFT mean? If your teenager is texting MSFT, what might that mean?
My silly father is terrible.
Or talks too much.
Yes, that would be me.
So MSFT, that is the ticker symbol for a company that probably not very many of you have heard of, Microsoft. Everybody's heard of Microsoft. So Microsoft is a publicly traded company. It means they have sold a portion of their company to the public, and you can actually purchase it if you want. And it's actually one of the stocks in the S&P 500. In fact, it's one of the largest, if not the largest, in the S&P 500 at the moment. As you can see, the bigger the company, the bigger the size in this index. So if you own the S&P 500, you're going to own more Microsoft than you will Home Depot. Even though they're both in the S&P 500, the way this particular index works is the bigger the company, the bigger the percentage of the index. And so Microsoft is a bigger company, so they're going to be a bigger portion of the index. So let's see. I think those are the main questions I had on.
The only thing I'd add, Scott, is just to emphasize how diverse the holdings of the S&P 500 are. Look at, like, you've got technology, communication services, consumer defensive, healthcare. Look at real estate, energy. Look at all these different categories. So when you invest in a mutual fund that mirrors the S&P 500, your $100 a month is spread amongst all these companies. But like what Scott said, more of it would be going to the bigger companies. The other thing to point out is we're only looking at one day. And Scott and I are going to emphasize the importance of long-term thinking when it comes to investing. Let's see over a week. Let's see over a month. Starting to look not so red. Let's look over 3 months. Look at that. Look at that bright green. 6 months. Wow. Let's go back a year. Okay, much more green than red. And we recommend you don't look at the daily ups and downs of the market.
And when Dan just said those terms, the daily ups and downs of the market, that's when they say that, that's generally referring to the S&P 500. I'm going to tell you why you shouldn't only pay attention to the S&P 500 here in just a minute, but let's sort of recap the S&P 500. So this is made up of very large U.S. companies. Now they're going to sell their products overseas, but they are based in the United States. It's often called the market cap or market capitalization. That's what we were referring to as the bigger the company, the bigger the size in the index. They're not equally weighted. Not every company you're not going to own the same portion of every company within the index, at least the way the S&P 500 is currently created. It's going to be the bigger the company, the more you own of it. Now, the S&P 500 is not the only index. It's not the only market that you can invest in. In fact, it's only one. It's the U.S. large market. There are thousands of stocks in the United States. There are many more thousands of stocks throughout the world. You can buy stocks in a lot of different countries. The UK, you can buy them in Europe, Japan, Brazil. You used to be able to buy them in Russia. Not really anymore. So like you have both United States or domestic indexes, and then you also have international indexes. So you can purchase indexes that cover both the US and international. And generally we think it's good to be as diversified as possible. Indexes can also be of bonds. Which we're not. We'll get to those. I think we're getting to those. If not, that'll be a whole nother session. But you can also buy indexes that are not just of stocks, but of bonds as well. Okay, so the Dow Jones Industrial Average. This is like, you're going to probably hear this also. The Dow was up today. The Dow was down today. The Dow crashed this week. This was created a long time ago, all the way back in 1882, and it's supposed to track 30 of the most important U.S. companies. There is a committee that decides when a stock is added or subtracted, and this industrial average was created in 1896. It is not created and operated in the same way that the S&P 500 is, but it does tend to have pretty similar results. It would be rare to have a day or to have a year where the Dow Jones had a dramatically different outcome than the S&P 500. It can happen. I mean, like today, the S&P 500 was down 1.2%, while the Dow Jones was only down 0.65. That's almost half. It was down almost half of what the S&P 500 was. As you get further and further out, they get closer and closer in their returns. So let's go back. I know in the prior presentation they talked about mutual funds. Let's spend just a few minutes on mutual funds. A mutual fund there's lots of different types of mutual funds. We're going to talk about a stock mutual fund here. So what is a stock mutual fund? It's really just a place where a whole bunch of people pool their money together and then hire someone to invest it on their behalf. And that mutual fund can be made up of stocks, it can be made up of bonds, or it can be made up of cash. And it could be made up, it could get really, really specific. It might invest in just US stocks. It might invest in just US value stocks. It might invest in just technology stocks or healthcare stocks. But the mutual fund is really designed to provide normal people access to the stock market in a simple way. Because it used to be you had to go hire a broker, give them your money, and then tell them which individual stocks to buy. And it used to there used to be a commission every single time that you bought or sold a stock. It was really, really expensive. It was inaccessible. And mutual funds really began to rise in the late 70s and had a dramatic rise to the 90s because of 401k plans. And it really started to democratize the market, meaning it gave you access to the market in a simple way where you just get to pool your money with a bunch of people and you hire someone and they pick the stocks for you, or you hire someone and they implement that S&P 500 index for you. So they buy those stocks on your behalf. And you're able to do this at a much lower cost. Now, sometimes it's not at a much lower cost, so you have to be careful of expenses, as we've been talking about. And so there's two types of funds, the one where you hire a manager, and then there's the one where it's more passive. It's an index like the S&P 500. And you still have a manager for the index 500, but they're not Well, let me go back to this actively managed fund thing here. So when you have an actively managed fund, what they're trying to do is beat this index. They're trying to beat the S&P 500. Now, the S&P 500 seems like kind of a lazy way to invest your money, right? You just hand your money over and then they just replicate this index. That seems rather lazy. So the active manager is thinking, wait, that's so lazy. I can beat this. I can beat this, no problem. But I'm going to need a staff. I'm going to need a bunch of people. I'm going to have to fly all over the country, fly over the world. I got to do all this research. And so it becomes a lot more expensive. And it turns out that actively managed funds, people who are trying to beat the index, trying to pick the stocks that are going to go up more than the other stocks, they don't actually beat the index that often. And they don't usually beat the index over long periods of time. Passively managed index funds are the ones that generally, not always, but often and over long periods of time, are going to beat the active mutual funds. Why is that? Well, I'd have you put it in the chat, but we have a slide here of why that is. Generally, the reason is stock picking is really, really hard. We can't all be Warren Buffett. And in fact, there are thousands of people on Wall Street whose daily job it is to figure out what stock is going to be a better stock than the other stock. So you are literally competing against some of the smartest people in the world, and most of them aren't going to get it right either. At the end of the day, one of the main reasons you're unlikely to beat the market is because you're paying a lot in fees. And index funds should, they're supposed to have very low fees. And so if you have the right kind of index fund and it has very low fees, so for example, the Fidelity total market index fund, I think charges like 0.02%. I mean, that's very low. That's a lot lower than some of these actively managed funds that can charge up to 1.5%, or if you're in a variable annuity, over 2%. 1 or 2% doesn't sound like a lot, but over long periods of time, it makes a huge difference. Even in a year to year, it can make a big difference. So generally, active is going to not be as good as a passively managed index fund. So that brings us to annuities. And I want to say one thing. Now, annuities get a bad rap, and it's mostly of their own making. I like to say, mutual funds and annuities, neither of these are good or bad products. They're just products. So the product itself is not good or bad, but the execution of that product could be good or bad. There are plenty of bad mutual funds. We just talked about them. Expensive, actively managed funds, not a great place to have your money. Same thing with annuities. Annuities can be good if used in the right situation, and it makes sense. But generally in the 403b world, there's just a lot of abuse that goes on in annuities. And so I very rarely will recommend an annuity in a 403b because the products that are offered are generally not very good. There's 3 types of annuities. Technically, there's 2 that we'll talk about. And we're talking about annuities where you accumulate money into them. The whole purpose of an annuity is eventually to turn it into a lifetime income stream, but we're not going to talk about that part right now. We're going to talk about the part where you're putting your money into them. So there's fixed annuities, and these are kind of like a CD. So like they're not CDs, they're not FDIC insured, but they have similar characteristics. If you put your money into it, you're going to get a minimum rate of return that is stated in this contract. It's a contract with an insurance company. And they're going to give you a minimum rate of return and potentially more. So they might say, okay, we're going to give you 4.5% for 2024. And then we're going to reset that rate in 2025, but it won't be less than, say, 1%. There are a lot of different ways to credit interest in a fixed annuity, but it's going to be something along those lines. This is not a product that is going to fluctuate negatively. It's not going to go down. It should not go down in value. So it's very steady. It's just going to pay you interest over time. The second type is called a variable annuity. And a variable annuity is just like its name sounds. It can fluctuate. It can go up and down with the market. It actually is going to be invested. It can be invested in stocks. It can also be invested in bonds. What a variable annuity really is, it's just it's basically a mutual fund that has insurance added to it. Some sort of insurance component is added to it. And oftentimes that insurance component can be very expensive. Sometimes that insurance component is hiding other things like commissions to the people who are selling them. But variable annuities, they don't have to be expensive, but in the 403B world, they tend to be expensive. And not only that, they tend to have what are called surrender charges that can last for many, many, many years. So in order to get your money out of one, you may have to pay a percentage of your contributions to get your money out if you try to get it out before, say, 5, 10, or 12 years. But they're basically like a mutual fund with some insurance wrapped around them. I'm not going to get into what that insurance looks like because that would be a whole nother hour presentation. And then finally, there's indexed annuities. Now, an indexed annuity is actually a form of a fixed annuity. It is a fixed annuity. However, they credit interest in a way that is different than a traditional fixed annuity. Traditional fixed annuity, they declare a rate and tell you what that rate is going to be in advance. An indexed annuity does not declare a rate in advance. They tie your interest to some sort of index. It could be any index. Oftentimes, it's the S&P 500. Now, don't get your hopes up. You're not going to get the returns of the S&P 500 with an indexed annuity. These are designed to be conservative investments, a little more aggressive than just a traditional fixed annuity, but they're not supposed to go down in value. If you take your money out early, you may get less than you put in. But what they're doing is they're trying to tie the interest credits to an index. If that index goes up, you will get a portion of the increase in that index. If the index goes down, your money doesn't go down. You just end up with a 0% return. These are also called equity indexed annuities. Now that sounds pretty cool. Like, who wouldn't want to get the ups of the markets without the downs? But they don't actually operate that way. One, they do not include dividends. Two, they don't generally give you all of the participation of the increase of the stock market. So often, and then three, sometimes they add a fee on there as well. And four, they often add what's called a cap. So one very popular product that's available in a lot of school districts in Florida in 2000, I think it was 2021, they had a cap of like 2% on their product. So if the market went up by 2%, you got 2%. If the market went up by 10%, you got 2%. Market went up by 30%, you got 2%. So generally, these products are all hype. And the reason they're so popular is because they pay the highest commissions. They get sold because they pay the highest commissions and they have the best trips. And we're going to get into that in just a minute. All right. One of our favorite personal finance columnists, he runs his own blog now, but he used to be a personal finance columnist at the Wall Street Journal. His blog now is called Humble Dollar, and it's fantastic. We love it. We've had him on our podcast. He once tweeted out, and I'm going to stick with tweet, estimated annual sales of equity indexed annuities if salesmen weren't paid huge commissions. $0. None. Now, I'm not so sure that would be true today in 2024 because there are some better products on the market. But I can promise you this, there's not going to be any equity indexed annuities sold in the 403B if the commissions aren't where they're at or the incentives are where they're at. The ones that are available in the 403B world are pretty bad, and I would stay away from them.
All right. Thanks, Scott.
Yes.
Okay. I have got a question for folks. The historical odds of making money in the US market over a 1-day period. What do you think it is? Is it 50-50, 75-25, 25-75, 35%, 80%? What do you think your chance on any given day of making money in the stock market? And let's just say it's the S&P 500. Any guesses? Any guesses? All right. I'm going to pretend you made a guess. Oh, 30%. Thank you, Veronica. I appreciate it. It's 50-50. Okay. So yesterday, or actually today, the market was down. Tomorrow, it could be up. All right. How about over 1-year periods? What would be a guess over 1-year period? What would the returns be? Okay. We got 80%. Thank you, Stacy. 68%. But our guesses are trending in a higher direction. Okay. What about over 10-year periods? Any guesses over? You invest in the S&P 500 over a 10-year period. What is your guess? I'm going to say that 90%. It is 88%, Mr. Dauenhauer. Very good guess. And then, folks, my favorite, over 20-year periods. What is the chance? Ding, ding, ding. We have a winner. Folks, again, I teach this concept in my personal finance class. We need to think of our money as 2 buckets. Our savings money, that money we need in 0 to 5 years, right? To fix the roofs, to fix the car. The other bucket, the investing, we need to have a long time horizon. Folks, look what happens when we invest for a long period of time. All right, 100%. Amazing. So far. Now that could change, but so far. And this data comes from one of my favorite books, The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel, a very highly readable book. Let's look at some more data here. So what you're looking at is the returns of the stock market. So we're basically talking the S&P 500 from 1926, so before Black Friday, the big crash that led to the Great Depression, helped trigger the Great Depression, all the way to 2019. Look at all of that green. But folks, it's not all green. There is red there. And you can see over time, the market can drop, and it can drop precipitously. But if you are a long-term investor, who cares? When the market goes down, just as Scott said, I'm still in the accumulation phase. So I actually kind of celebrate that. It means let's say $100 a month I'm putting in my 403B. When the market goes down, that $100 buys more shares. That's really what you should be concerned about in the accumulation phase. Be in low-cost investment, understand what you're investing, but you try to accumulate as many shares as possible. Over time, this is going to really pay off. Folks, let's look at some years beyond 2019. We got 2000. What you're looking at here is the importance of maintaining investing discipline. Reacting to market volatility can jeopardize returns. The blue chart is money that's in a portfolio split about 60-40%. The yellow or orange is 100% into cash. Folks, look at that drop when COVID hit. Look at that. Just folks that got out of stocks and then went into cash only. Not everyone did that. So we can compare the returns of these two type of investors. If you panicked because of COVID, which again was scary, and went 100% into cash, folks, your return between the start of COVID to December 22 was minus 2%. If you had stayed the course, 21% return. So just to move things along, I will tell you the big takeaway is, folks, know which bucket of money you are talking about. If it's for the long term, do not panic. The world is always turbulent. There is always something to fret about. But I am willing to look at past returns. That gives me confidence that going forward over time, the market's going to do well. All right, Scott's going to quickly talk about asset allocation.
Thanks, Dan. So asset allocation, this is a term that is very prominent in the investing world, but might not resonate. If you haven't been investing, you might not know what it means. So we're going to try to go over this pretty quickly. It basically just refers to how you distribute your investments across different types of assets. And we've talked about stocks, we've talked about bonds, a little bit about cash. So stocks are going to be very aggressive. They go up and down. Bonds, they don't go up and down as much. And cash is very steady. Asset allocation is how much of each of these are you going to have in your portfolio? Are you super aggressive? So you're all in stocks, or are you very, very conservative? You might be all in bonds and cash. Let's take a look at some different ways you could invest over time. So we like the KISS principle. Keep it simple, silly. Is that what our second S is, Dan?
Exactly.
All right.
Or Scott. Keep it simple,
Keep it
Scott.
simple,
That's what
Scott.
I'm
There
always
you go.
selling Scott when we're talking about things like, Scott, slow it down. I might have a PhD, but I have no idea what you're talking about.
This is true. So we like these one fund solutions because they allow you to put your money to work, and then you can go off and do the things that you really like to do. So there's two different types. The first one's called a target risk, or it might also be called life strategy. The reason it's called target risk is because you are targeting a specific amount of risk. And when we say risk, we're kind of using stocks as the target. So you're targeting a certain percentage of your portfolio in stocks. You can see here, so this is Vanguard. Vanguard offers 4 different target risk funds. They call them their life strategy funds, and they target different levels of stocks from 20% stocks to 80% stocks. They have a 20%, 40%, 60%, 80%. They put together, they manage it for you, but they're always going to have, whichever fund you choose, that percentage of stocks and bonds. So if you choose this 60% stock, 40% bond fund, no matter what happens with stocks throughout the year, they're going to rebalance and keep you at 60% stocks, and they're going to manage that stock portion for you. So as Dan says in the comments, there is a static. This is if you're just trying to target a certain percentage of stocks in your portfolio. You know how much risk you want to take, and this fund will implement that for you. Vanguard charges, I think, 0.08% for this particular investment option, and it's very good. Fidelity offers something similar. Unfortunately, they don't have an index option available for this. So theirs are usually actively managed, and they've got ones that target almost every single level from 20% all the way up to 85. They got 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, and 85. I'm not sure why they don't have like 10 and 80 and 90, but somebody made a decision there. And again, same thought process. They manage it for you in one place. It's one fund. You're targeting an equity exposure, stock exposure. So the more stock exposure, the more your portfolio will fluctuate, both up and down. And to give you an example of what that might look like, we've got a couple different portfolios here. We've got one that's 100% in fixed income, and historically that's returned around 5%. I think going forward it'll be a little bit lower than that, but in that 5% range. Amazingly, in 1982, that a 100% fixed income portfolio returned almost 33%. I would tell you that is an anomaly. If anybody knows what was going on in the late 70s, early 80s with inflation and interest rates, you might understand why we had that kind of a return. But the worst year was 8%. Actually, this slide is before 2023, so we're going to need to update it because last year was the worst year. I think the worst year for a 100% fixed income portfolio was somewhere around -12%, which was last year. But it only had 14 years out of 94 where it had a loss. So there's not going to be a lot of fluctuation in a 100% fixed income portfolio, but there's also not going to be as much return. I'll be showing you what a portfolio that has more stocks than it looks like later, but just for the sake of so you can see it here, a 30% stock portfolio had averaged around 7%. And funnily enough, its best year was only 28.67%. It's actually worse than the 100% fixed income portfolio. I had not noticed that until just this minute, Dan. That's kind of funny. So we're going to show you another slide later on that gives you the ranges. So the other type of simple asset allocation option is the target date fund. And what a target date fund does, instead of targeting the amount of risk that you're taking, it's targeting a date that you're going to retire. And so that target date is going to be sometime in the future where you plan to retire. If you are if you're 10 years away from teaching today, you're probably going to be looking at a 2035 target date fund. That's about 10 years from now. And what happens with that fund is it's more aggressive in your early years and your younger years. And the closer you get to retirement, the less conservative, the less aggressive it becomes. It becomes more and more conservative the closer you get to retirement. It does not turn into a 100% fixed income portfolio at retirement. It continues to have a stock allocation. In fact, this is how we call it a glide path. This is how the asset allocation looks over time. As you can see in the very early years on the left, you got a lot of red and a lot of yellow. That represents the stock portion. And as you get closer to retirement, that takes this line, goes down and down, down. You're getting less and less stock exposure. And then when you hit retirement, stock exposure doesn't go to zero. You still have stock exposure in that account. But the beauty of this is it's managed by someone else. You don't have to do the work. All you have to do is contribute to it. And when the stocks go down, maybe up your contributions. So it's one fund. If you pick the right one, the fees can be very low and it will do all the work for you. Now, I had said earlier what kind of range we might see with a stock portfolio, 100% bonds or 100% stocks. Now, this chart does a pretty good job of looking at what your range of returns over a full year would be. You have to remember that your actual gains or losses could be more within that 1 year time frame. But over a full year, the dot in the middle is what the average return is over time. And I want to look at the middle one, the 40% bonds, 60% stocks. The average return has been 7%. But take a look at the range of returns. There are years where it's had a 25% return, but there's also been years where it's returned negative 21%. So it can be a lot of fluctuation in the short term. And so you have to go into these investments knowing that they're going to fluctuate, but over long periods of time, you end up with a positive return. And then 100% stocks, highest return has been 34%. Lowest return has been negative 22% in a single year. Okay, so Jill and Lisa, we're talking about investment advisors and salespeople in the prior session. And so we're going to talk about advisor or advisors in this session as well, and what might drive advice. And luckily, we actually were able to cover this in the previous session. But if you hadn't listened to the previous session, I'm just going to give you a quick overview of what we talked about. Somebody had asked, is someone a fiduciary, is someone who calls himself an advisor a fiduciary? And our answer was not necessarily. So let me explain that a little bit. When someone says they're an advisor, a lot of people in the 403 market call themselves advisors. A lot of people, they refer themselves as advisors, but they're not actually advisors in the sense that they are required to act in your best interest, or they're required to put your interests ahead of their own. they may not be required to be a fiduciary. So we believe that if you're going to hire someone to manage your money or give you advice on your personal finances, that they should always act as a fiduciary. An advisor is someone who always acts as a fiduciary. So we believe you should ask that person who's trying to sell you on their services, are you a fiduciary at all times? And there's only one answer to that. It's either yes or no. I mean, the answer should be yes. If they say no, they're not a fiduciary at all times, well, then they're not an advisor at all times. They might be sometimes an advisor and sometimes selling you something. Jill and Lisa turned on their screens real quick. Do you have anything to add to that? I know putting you on the spot a little bit here, but do you guys have anything to add to that?
No, I don't think so. I was just looking up on the S.E.C. website, and there is something, with Reg BI that's pretty new. It's been the last 5 years, which kind of raises the standard for a broker. And if you go to our SEC.gov webpage and type in difference between a broker and an advisor, there's something, as the headline says, choosing a financial professional. And it talks about knowing the difference between a broker and an investment advisor. And it pretty much lays out what you just mentioned. And it looks like it's a series of video chats so that people can, it's like a little mini lecture. But yeah, I think Scott, I think you pretty much got it. Lisa, any thoughts?
No, I have nothing to add. I think that's a great resource, and the more you practice asking these questions and listening until you fully understand, the better off you'll be. So use our resource. Jill just put it up. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Jill. Thank you, Lisa. And the other thing we often hear these days is if you ask the question, are you a fiduciary at all times? And the response back is, I will work in your best interest. That's not the question you asked. The question you asked is, will you act as a fiduciary at all times? And there shouldn't be any hemming or hawing. The answer should be yes. So what drives advice? Well, what drives recommendations is probably a better way to say it. Dan, can you back up one slide? Believe it or not, there's at least one company that works in the 403B space, and actually there's several, but one that's very prominent in Florida. This is what might be driving the the recommendations that you're receiving. So who wouldn't want to go to the Big Island? Who wouldn't want to go to Ireland? Who wouldn't want to go on this amazing trip? A lot of people selling 403B products, and it's generally the ones who sell the equity indexed annuities or the indexed annuities, they get to go on these amazing vacations. I think this year it's Hawaii. I think it's Maui this year. The Ritz-Carlton. The Ritz-Carlton in Maui. If they sell you enough of their indexed annuity product, and they don't have to tell you that's what's behind the recommendations. So that's why it's so important that when someone's trying to sell you something, you ask, are you acting as a fiduciary? And you get it in writing. And we have resources on 403B Wise where you can ask these questions and get it in writing. So what else is driving it? On the next slide, you'll see a commission schedule of a very prominent company that sells to 403Bs. Now, they don't sells to teachers a 403B. Now, they don't sell these particular products anymore. They have a new set of products out. But you'll see the first year commission there is 10%. 10% of your premium. Now, you're not going to see 10% of your account balance leave and go to this agent. Instead, what they do is the company fronts the 10% commission to the agent, and then you're trapped in this product for like 10 years or so while they try to recoup the money they paid to this agent. And generally, they have to recoup that large commission and the trips by paying you a lower rate of return. So what is driving the recommendations? Is it your best interest? Is it what's best for you? Or is something else that is maybe better for the person selling these products? How do these people even get in to talk to you? Oftentimes it's through misleading emails. We see this a lot. In fact, here's one. Somebody unfortunately sent it to Aaron Standish, who's on this call. That was a big mistake. But as you can see, this person said, "Hi, my name is so-and-so, and I handle the 403B." That is quite a claim, because within that sentence, you get the sense that there's only a single 403B, and this person is the one you have to talk to get into it. But that's not even close to the truth. This person isn't going to tell you that Fidelity is available, or there might be other investment options available. So this email is very misleading. And this is just one of dozens and dozens. I actually have hundreds in my email inbox from people who have sent me misleading emails. So be very careful what you receive. It might look like it's coming from your district office. Always double check. Send it to Aaron. He'll tell you if it's from the district or not. Sorry, Aaron. I think I just filled your inbox. All right, here's another one. And this one is your district approved retirement specialist will be holding a video. There are no district approved retirement specialists in Palm Beach County. But you wouldn't know it from this email. Very misleading. Okay, so we've talked about fiduciaries already. Now, a fiduciary doesn't have to hold a CFP, but we do think if someone is going to do financial planning for you, the CFP, the Certified Financial Planner designation, is a good designation to have. And anyone who does hold the Certified Financial Planner designation is subject to a fiduciary duty by the CFP board. There's more that I could get into, but I'm not going to get into it. But a CFP is good to have. How are they paid? You want to ask, how are they paid? And we actually have a whole set of questions. Dan has put it in the chat, but if you go to 403bwise.org, and I believe under advocacy, you can actually, under education, and so 403bwise.org/education/professional, you can get a whole list of questions to ask, as well as a document that they can sign that says that they will act as a fiduciary at all times. There are a few networks that offer fiduciary planning: Garrett Planning Network, XY Planning Network, NAPFA. There's also a really neat website called Hello Nectarine that we think has some really good advisors on it that you might be able to get fiduciary advice from there as well. I'm going to hand it back to Dan.
Okay, real fast. A couple places to get some more information. We love the Bogleheadsorganization.org. It's named after the late great founder of Vanguard, John Bogle. Our Facebook group is exploding. We're approving 20 to 30 members a day. We are over 15,000. It is a great place for teachers to ask and answer questions. We're big fans of the Longview podcast by Morningstar, and we were lucky enough to be on a couple years ago. We have our own weekly podcast, and we have interviewed Aaron. That was many years ago. We might need to do an update here, Aaron, but that is a weekly podcast available on all major podcast platforms, and probably the one we're most proud of because we didn't do it. We paid someone to put it together. It is a short pod series called Learned by Being Burned, Teachers in the K-12 403B, and it's teachers from all over the country documenting and sharing how they were, I would almost say, swindled, where they were tricked into signing up for these high-cost products, but they eventually got wise and are driving change. It's very optimistic. As I mentioned earlier, one of my favorite books is actually now a podcast as well. Morgan Housel, he is so pithy, so succinct. Unlike, I guess, maybe our presentation, Scott, which is a little bit long, his podcasts only run 15 to 20 minutes. His book is very, very readable. So with that, we will take any questions.
Yeah, feel free to unmute yourself if you have a question. We are right at the 6 o'clock hour. So if you have any questions, we'll be on for a few more minutes. So feel free to stay on. Otherwise, I'll send you guys a follow-up email in a few days.
Hey, Aaron, this is Jill. I have a question. Do you know if there are products in the ones available from your third-party administrator that require you to use one of their advisors?
Quite a few of them. Yeah.
Really?
A vast majority of them do. Yeah. There's only one that's up front and will give you, because you need the plan ID. You can go on and sign up for yourself. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up. So those who don't know, you can absolutely sign up for a 403B by yourself. Only Fidelity is the only one that gives you that plan code up front directly in our system, which is called PeopleSoft. For all the rest of them, all the other 14 or 15, you have to call the number of the advisor. You could request that advisor to give you the code. They're probably not going to.
And that probably adds in a layer of fees that you wouldn't normally get, right?
Absolutely. They are not doing that work for free for you.
Okay.
But they will sign you up. That's what they're there for.
Yeah.
They make it. They're there to sign you up. They're there to do the salary reduction agreement for you, which some people find useful. But I want anybody who's listening to know that you do not need them to do that. You can sign up on your own through PeopleSoft. You can do the salary reduction agreement on your own, also through PeopleSoft, and you can go to TSA Consulting Group, which I'll pull it up. I'll give you that information real quick.
And while Aaron's doing that, I'd like to know. I mean, I did some work on, and I wrote a post about how it's not really profitable to sign up teachers into these products. Even the products that pay high commissions, it's not really profitable them to just sign you up. Signing you up is the Trojan horse that gets them in to sell you other financial products. The goal is not to sell you a 403B. The goal is to get you to move your money from another 403B to their product, or from your 403B to an IRA, or your husband or your wife's 401k to an IRA, or to sell you life insurance, or to sell you disability, sell you something else. It's to get in and sell you other financial products. So yeah, they're more than willing to take a loss to sign you up because they know that they can make money on you on other things.
Yeah, well said. And that's a big reason why I'm doing the next session on April 30th in person, which is on the Florida retirement system. I'm simply doing that because that's one of the biggest Trojan horses of getting you in to sign up for these expensive products Scott's talking about, is they often claim that they're going to provide FRS education. And they do. They will provide a little bit of education for about 20% of the time. The other 80% of the time is trying to get you to sign up for one of those expensive products Scott was just talking about. So that's why we're doing that FRS presentation, is to try to get you that education so you don't fall for one of those Trojan horse techniques. Stacy has a question. I'll go ahead and read it. It says, I'm not sure if my microphone will work, but just in case it doesn't, I have a fixed annuity from one of those groups. Would you recommend taking it out and putting it into 403B or into another 403B with Fidelity or something else?
One of the issues with these indexed annuity products, like I said, that because they pay high commissions and qualify the agent for trips, they can be difficult to get out of and expensive to get out of. So oftentimes they have what are called surrender charges. And those surrender charges, especially on indexed annuities, can be very high, sometimes 7, 8, 9, 10% of the balance, sometimes even higher. I've seen higher. And so the first thing I would recommend is that you stop contributions to it and then start contributing. Then open an account with a new vendor, such as Fidelity, and have contributions going to that. So the first thing is to stop and redirect your contributions to a new vendor. Fidelity is not going to charge you if there is another 403B that you ever wanted to move the money to. Fidelity is not going to charge you to get out of it. There's no surrender charges. There's no commissions involved. Then perhaps when you have a little bit more time, maybe, well, I guess spring break's over, maybe during the summer, you can potentially reach out to an advisor, one of the networks that we showed, or Helena Nectarine, and maybe have them evaluate that product, or you can take a look at the product. It's probably going to be best to get out of it, but I hate to give blanket recommendations on any products, because sometimes there might be something about that product where you need to stay in it for a little while in order to not get hit with an even higher surrender charge. But longer term, it's probably going to be best to find a way out of that particular product.
There's also what I learned last year on the 403B day in 2023 is the recurring the recurring redemption charge, right? So if you put in money towards your selection that's an equity indexed annuity or a fixed annuity, every time you put in your $50 or $100 rolling surrender charge, yes, thanks, Dan, that is subject to the time limit. So if you have a surrender charge on that product that's 10 years, every time you contribute, it's extending that. So what you want to do is make sure you understand what that recurring surrender charge is before you make an exchange or try to get out of it. So to reiterate what Scott just said is it might be better in the short term to halt payments towards that product and then redirect them to something that's better fits your needs.
It's one of the things that angers us even more. I mean, they make it so easy to get in, so hard and expensive to get out. That's why I posted in the chat, if you are someone that wants to get out of a bad 403b, highly recommend you join the 403b Wise Facebook group. I'm going to say that we have at least 500 people that have successfully gotten out of Equitable, probably more. And they make it very difficult to do this, but you will get support from folks and tips from folks in the 403b Wise Facebook group.
Yeah, and I'll just add one quick thing, Stacy, is you some of the steps you can do on your own, like stopping your contribution, which Scott said is the first step. You don't need to call your rep to do that. If you do that, they're gonna give you the sales pitch to why you don't need to do that, and you can simply go into PeopleSoft, go into the voluntary retirement plans page, which is under benefits, and it has your contribution there. If you want to stop those contributions, click delete. Don't be worried. It's not going to delete your account. It's just going to delete the contribution to the account.
This is so frustrating, but this was probably one of the best classes that I was able to take, or one of the best presentations that I was able to have. So I really do appreciate you putting this out there for us and the reminders and all of it. It's been very helpful.
Thank you, Stacy. We appreciate that, and spread the word. We try to get this out to as many people as possible. We send out a lot of reminders, like you said, and if you ever want us on your campus, we're also happy to come and do like on a PD day or a preschool day. We've gone to quite a few campuses around the county on like PD days and preschool days. So we're happy to help.
Awesome. I will let them know. Thank you so much.
Thank you.